They laid a trap. Framing their questions carefully, they probed for a misstep, hoping to catch her off guard. But Carrie Underwood remained poised, her sharp, measured responses slowly turning the interview against them. The bright studio lights beamed down on the glossy stage floor, reflecting off the sleek glass table between two leather chairs. The audience buzzed, some fans, some skeptics, but all eager to watch the next few minutes unfold. At the center of it all sat Carrie Underwood, effortlessly composed. Her signature blonde waves cascaded over her shoulders, and she wore a fitted pastel blazer over a simple white blouse. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. Just enough to command attention without demanding it. This was routine. Another stop on a long promotional tour. Another interview. Across from her sat the host of the Midday Exchange, a popular daytime talk show known for pushing boundaries. The host, sharp-tongued and drawn to confrontation, leaned forward with a smile that didn't quite reach their eyes. "So, Carrie," they began, crossing their legs, "congratulations on the new album. Another #1 debut. It must feel like second nature by now." Carrie let out a warm laugh, tilting her head slightly. "I wouldn't say that. Every album is its own challenge, its own experience. It never gets old." The audience applauded. This was why Carrie had remained a favorite. Humble, relatable, the perfect balance of confidence and grace. The interview began as expected. Safe, predictable. Talk of inspiration, late nights in the studio, the thrill of touring again. But then came the shift. The host set down their cue cards. "You've built a career on staying true to country music. Your songs, your image, your sound. It's all rooted in tradition, but country music has a complicated history, wouldn't you say?" The words lingered in the air, deliberate and calculated. Carrie didn't flinch, but there was a flicker in her eyes. She knew this game. She had seen it before. The subtle ways a question could be framed to stir controversy. Still, she stayed composed. "Every genre evolves," she replied smoothly. "Music changes with time, and country is no different. But at its core, country music has always been about storytelling, about real life, real people." The host nodded slowly, as if waiting for her to say more. When she didn't, they pressed forward. "Right. But when we talk about real life," they continued, "we can't ignore that country music has often been associated with a certain perspective. Some would say it's exclusionary. Do you think the genre has done enough to address that?" A murmur rippled through the audience. Some leaned in, eager for tension. Others shifted uncomfortably. Carrie remained still, barely blinking. She had two choices: take the bait and engage in a conversation she hadn't come here for, or handle it the way she always had, with grace, intelligence, and maybe even a little humor. Before she could answer, the host leaned in, their voice dropping just enough to make it clear they weren't finished. "I mean, let's be honest," they said with a knowing smile. "Country music hasn't always been the most inclusive genre, has it? A lot of people still see it as catering to one kind of audience, one kind of message." Carrie took a slow breath, her expression unreadable. She had spent years in interviews like this, ones that started as casual conversations about music, but slowly morphed into pressure tests. She smiled, but it was the kind that gave nothing away. "Country music is for everyone," she said simply. "It's about stories, emotions, things people connect to no matter where they come from." The audience clapped, some nodding in agreement. The host, however, wasn't ready to let the moment pass. "Right," they said, shifting in their chair. "But when you look at the bigger picture, who gets platformed, who gets celebrated, don't you think there's a pattern? Maybe even a responsibility to challenge that?" Carrie tilted her head slightly, considering the question. But the truth was, she already knew the answer. This wasn't the first time she'd heard a version of it, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But Carrie Underwood wasn't about to let someone else dictate the conversation. "Well, should I?" she said lightly, her tone effortless. "I'd say the biggest responsibility any artist has is to make music that speaks to people. You can't force connection. People listen to what resonates with them, and that's true for every genre, not just country. The host let out a small chuckle, shaking their head. Come on, Carrie, you have to admit it's a little more complicated than that. Carrie leaned in slightly, matching the host's energy without losing an ounce of her composure. If it is, that's a conversation worth having, she said smoothly. But it's interesting how country music is always the one put under a microscope. Every genre has its own history. Rock, pop, hip-hop, they've all evolved in different ways. But somehow country is the one that always gets singled out. A mix of applause and murmurs rippled through the audience. It wasn't a defensive answer. It was firm, logical, one that made people think. The host's smile tightened. They were trying to steer the conversation in one direction, but Carrie wasn't making it easy. They tried again. Fair point. But let's talk specifics. Your song Smoke Break, for example, some critics felt it glamorized certain working-class struggles instead of addressing them. What do you say to that? Carrie exhaled a quiet, amused breath. I'd say those critics might need to listen to the lyrics a little closer. The audience laughed, a few people clapping. She continued, her voice steady but warm. Smoke Break isn't about glamorizing anything. It's about real people, real struggles. It's about the weight people carry every day, and the small moments they steal just to breathe. That's not political, that's human. The applause came louder this time. The energy in the room was shifting. What had started as a subtle attempt to corner her was turning into something else. But the host wasn't ready to back down. They leaned in slightly, their voice dipping lower. They were preparing to deliver the question, the one they thought would finally catch her off guard. The host tapped their pen lightly against the armrest, their smile a little less relaxed than before. They had tried to guide the conversation down a familiar path, but Carrie wasn't following. She was too sharp, too composed. Time to change tactics. Okay, they said, feigning a casual air. But let's talk about something bigger. You've got millions of fans, Carrie. People who listen to every word you sing, every interview you give. Don't you think that gives you a certain influence? Carrie nodded slightly, letting the question hang for a moment before answering. I think any artist with a platform has influence, she said simply. That comes with the job. But I also think people connect with artists for the music first. That's what matters most. The host gave a slow nod, but their gaze was sharp. They weren't done. Right, they pressed. But what about when people expect more? Some artists, big names, have used their platform to take a stand on social and political issues. Some would say country music has been slow to do that. Do you think country artists have a responsibility to speak up more? There it was. The question designed to push her into a corner. A simple yes or no wouldn't be enough. Any answer she gave would be dissected, turned into a headline. Carrie smiled. But this time it was the kind of smile that made it clear. She saw exactly what was happening. I think people speak up in different ways, she said smoothly. For some, that means using their platform for activism. For others, it means writing music that helps people feel seen. Neither one is more important than the other. A low murmur spread through the audience. It was a balanced answer, one that avoided the trap while still making a point. But the host wasn't satisfied. They leaned forward, voice dropping just slightly, as if inviting Carrie into something deeper. But don't you think silence can be just as loud as speaking out? The room shifted. This was the moment. The setup. The perfect opportunity to frame Carrie as either too passive or too controversial. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she let out a small chuckle, shaking her head. You know, she said, it's funny. I don't remember anyone asking. Rock artists that question in every interview, or pop stars, or rappers. It's always country music that gets put under a microscope. The reaction was instant. Applause, laughter, a few whistles. The host blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Carrie continued, her voice calm but firm. People assume a lot about country music, who listens to it, what it represents. But at the end of the day, music is music. And if people really listen, they'll hear a lot more than just what they expect. The audience erupted again, louder this time. The hosts shifted in their chair, trying to keep their expression neutral. This wasn't going the way they had planned. But instead of backing down, they doubled down. One last attempt to control the narrative before the interview slipped completely out of their hands. The host straightened slightly, still composed, but there was something else now. Frustration, maybe. They hadn't expected Carrie to be this smooth, this unshakable, but they weren't done yet. Forcing a light chuckle, they tried again. That's fair, they conceded. But let's be real, Carrie. Country music has historically been seen as, and let's just say, aligned with a certain set of values. And some might argue that in today's world, staying neutral is the same as picking a side. There it was, the final push. A challenge disguised as a question. Carrie took a slow breath, then leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. She didn't look defensive. She looked comfortable, in control. Well, she said, tapping her fingers lightly against the armrest. If staying neutral means focusing on making music that connects with people instead of turning every song into a political statement, then yeah, I guess I've picked a side. The audience roared with laughter and applause. Some stood up, clapping. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Whatever tension had been lingering evaporated, replaced by something else. Excitement. Support. The host's smile faltered for half a second before they quickly recovered, adjusting the cards in their lap. But Carrie wasn't done. Her voice remained light, but her words were razor sharp. You know what I think is funny? She asked, glancing toward the audience. Some people assume that if you're from the South or if you sing country music, they already know everything about you. Like they've got you figured out before you even open your mouth. More applause. A few people shouted in agreement. Carrie turned back to the host, her expression warm, but her meaning unmistakable. I think people underestimate country music fans, she said. They think they're just one thing, one mindset. But the truth is, country music is for a lot of different people from a lot of different places. And you know what they all have in common? The host raised an eyebrow, waiting. They just want good music, Carrie said simply. Something that speaks to them. Something real. They don't need someone telling them what they should think or how they should feel. They can decide that for themselves. The applause was deafening. The host opened their mouth, maybe to counter, maybe to pivot, but it didn't matter. The moment had slipped completely out of their hands. A woman in the audience stood up, calling out, "That's why we love you, Carrie." Carrie laughed, shaking her head. "I love y'all too." The host, realizing they had lost control of the narrative, let out a forced chuckle. "Well," they said, "I have to admit, you certainly know how to handle an interview." Carrie flashed a grin. "I've had some practice." The audience erupted again. For the first time since the interview started, the host seemed at a loss for words. But instead of letting the moment settle, they made one last desperate attempt, an offhand comment they thought might save face. The host adjusted the cuffs of their blazer, forcing a laugh that didn't quite reach their eyes. They could feel the shift in the room. Carrie had taken the reins. No matter how hard they tried to steer the conversation, she remained unshaken. Still, they weren't ready to walk away just yet. With a smirk, they leaned forward. "Well, Carrie, I have to say, you've got a real talent for dodging questions." The audience let out a mix of chuckles and murmurs. Carrie's expression didn't change. She knew exactly what this was. When words failed, some people resorted to baiting, to framing the other person as evasive even when they had answered every question with clarity. She let the words hang in the air for just a second, then tilted her head slightly. "Oh, I don't think I've dodged a single one," she said, voice smooth as ever. "I just think we're having two different conversations." The host's smirk flickered, just for a brief moment, before they masked it with another chuckle. "And what conversation do you think I'm having?" they asked. Carrie's eyes sparkled. Maybe it was amusement, or maybe it was just the quiet confidence of someone who had been underestimated one too many times. Carrie crossed her arms comfortably. "Well," she said, "I came here to talk about my music, my tour, but I feel Like you came here to have a conversation about me." A ripple of murmurs swept through the audience. The host shifted in their seat. Carrie's tone remained light, but every word was deliberate. "And that's okay," she added with an easy smile. "I just think it's funny how people love to put artists into little boxes. You sing this kind of music, so you must think this way. You come from this place, so you must believe that, but life's not that simple, is it?" More applause. Some nodded. Others murmured in agreement. The host forced a chuckle, but it was clear they were losing their grip. This wasn't the interview they had planned. Maybe they had expected Carrie to stumble, to dodge, to deflect. Instead, she had flipped the entire conversation on its head. Exhaling sharply, they tapped their cue cards together and tried one last angle. "Well," they said, "it's clear you've got strong opinions, even if you don't always say them outright." Carrie let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "No," she said simply. "I just believe in letting people think for themselves. And I believe music is supposed to bring people together, not divide them." The crowd erupted again, and this time, the frustration on the host's face was impossible to mask. They forced a tight-lipped smile and glanced at the cameras. "Well, Carrie, this has certainly been an interesting conversation." Carrie smiled back. "Hasn't it?" The host cleared their throat, stealing a glance at the clock, realizing perhaps that they had run out of time. "Well, your album Denim and Rhinestones is out now, and your tour kicks off next month. Best of luck with everything." Carrie nodded, graciously. "Thank you, and thanks for having me." Applause filled the studio as the show cut to commercial, but the tension still hung in the air. The cameras might have stopped rolling, but the real show was just beginning, because this interview wasn't going to be forgotten anytime soon. Within hours, clips of Carrie's calm, effortless takedown flooded social media, turning this so-called interview into something much bigger. It started with a few tweets, fans, reacting in real time, quoting her sharpest comebacks, praising the way she handled the host without ever losing her composure. Then it exploded. Videos of the exchange spread like wildfire. One titled "Carrie Underwood Schools Host Without Breaking a Sweat" racked up 500,000 views in 2 hours. Another, "Carrie Underwood Stuns Host with the Perfect Response," trended on YouTube. The comment sections lit up. She handled that with so much class. No yelling, no arguing, just pure intelligence and grace. This is how you do it. Let people talk themselves into a hole, then hit them with the truth. Notice how the host kept trying to bait her and she never fell for it? That's how you... No, she's been in this industry too long to be played. Even mainstream outlets couldn't ignore it. Articles popped up. Carrie Underwood's talk show interview goes viral. Here's why everyone's talking about it. Carrie Underwood shuts. Downloaded questions on country music and politics. And it wasn't just fans reacting. Other celebrities weighed in. A well-known country artist tweeted, "Carrie just did what every country singer has wanted to do in an interview. Absolute masterclass." A Hollywood actor, known for their outspoken views, commented on Instagram, "I may not be a country fan, but I respect anyone who can handle themselves like that under pressure. That's how you own a conversation." Even a famous sports commentator chimed in, "That wasn't an interview, that was a setup," and she flipped it on them. That's what winning looks like. Meanwhile, the host of the midday exchange was facing their own fallout. Their name trended on social media, but for all the wrong reasons. Instead of applause, they faced wave after wave of criticism. This was embarrassing to watch. They were trying so hard to trap her, and she just outclassed them the whole time. The host kept pushing some narrative that didn't exist. Carrie didn't fall for it, and they had no idea what to do when she called them out. Imagine thinking you can manipulate an artist who's been in the industry for almost 2 decades. Yikes. For the first time in their career, the host was the one under scrutiny. Viewers weren't just questioning their tactics. They were calling them out for being unprofessional, for trying to force a headline instead of conducting a real interview. By the next morning, the network released a carefully worded statement. But it was too late. The internet had already made up its mind. The network scrambled for damage control, releasing a carefully worded statement. The interview, it claimed, had been a spirited discussion, and the midday exchange was proud to welcome a variety of perspectives. But the public wasn't buying, and now the show's ratings were under scrutiny, not in a good way. Viewers dissected past interviews, comparing them to Carrie's. Patterns emerged. Biases were exposed. The host's credibility took hit after hit. And Carrie? She carried on with her day like nothing had happened. She posted a single photo on Instagram, a casual shot from the green room after the interview. Coffee cup in hand, boots propped up on the table. The caption? Just another day at the office. The internet lost it. Memes flooded Twitter. GIFs of her calm, composed expressions during the interview were everywhere. Someone even edited a boss move sticker onto one of her clips, complete with dramatic "ow" music. Carrie didn't need to say anything else. She didn't need to respond to the backlash, the headlines, or the host's weak attempts to salvage their reputation. She had already won. But the real impact of that interview would come later, when it became more than just a viral moment and turned into a larger conversation. Days passed, but the buzz didn't fade. If anything, it grew. Podcasts dissected every second of the exchange. Carrie's words, the host's tactics, the shift in power dynamics. TV commentators weighed in, some praising her poise under pressure, others framing it as a missed opportunity for her to take a stand on bigger issues. But the truth was simple. She had taken a stand. Not by shouting, not by arguing, not by turning it into a fight. She took a stand by refusing to let someone else define her, and that resonated far beyond country music, because people saw themselves in that interview. How many times had someone been put on the spot, expected to defend themselves against an assumption that wasn't even true? How often had someone felt cornered in a conversation, forced to prove they weren't what others had already decided they must be? Carrie had shown another way. You don't have to play the game. You don't have to let someone else set the rules. You can stay calm, stay composed, keep control of your own story. And when you do that, when you refuse to be boxed in, when you remind people that they don't know everything about you just because they think they do, that's when you really shritter. As the dust settled, the midday exchange moved on. New guests, new controversies. The host avoided mentioning the interview entirely, hoping the internet's short attention span would do its job. But the clip lived on. Months later, it was still circulating. New audiences discovered it, sharing it again with captions like, "This is how you handle a loaded question. Never let someone else tell you who you are. Take notes. This is how you keep your power." And Carrie, she was back on the road, playing to packed stadiums, doing what she did best. The music spoke for itself. One night, as the final notes of her encore faded and the cheers of the crowd filled the air, she stood at the edge of the stage. Looking out over thousands of faces, she smiled, lifted the mic, and left them with just a few words. You don't have to prove yourself to people who've already made up their minds about you. Just live your truth. That's enough. The audience roared in agreement, and as she walked off stage, boots clicking against the floor, head held high, one thing was clear. She had always known exactly who she was.